Okay, welcome to episode 2 in my complete photography course. I'm Oliver Lundy, a photographer in the UK, and you are about to watch Camera Basics Part 1. In this video, we're going to be going over the basics of cameras and also what different types of cameras are out there. This is partly aimed at people who have yet to buy their first camera, and it's also to give people some knowledge on the different types of cameras because it can get a little bit confusing. If you know all about your camera, or you've already bought your own camera, then by all means skip on to the second half of this video where we actually look at camera basics and the settings. So, what different types of cameras are there and where should you start? So the most basic type of camera is just your camera phone. It's amazing what you can do with a phone these days. The cameras are getting better and better, and the automated settings in them are getting better and better and better. Now, why would you choose to use a different camera over a camera phone? And there's lots of reasons for that, and I will go into it in more detail in later videos. But basically, smartphones and camera phones still have limitations, and most of those are to do with the fact that you can't change the lenses. And really modern smartphones have actually sort of gotten wind of this concept, and they've started to add extra cameras that have different focal lengths. And again, I'll go into focal lengths in another video. But ultimately, being able to change lenses and having a much bigger sensor make a big difference in photography, and a proper camera will always be able to outperform a smartphone, assuming that you know how to get the best out of your camera. So there's a reason why pros shooting in any kind of scenario use proper cameras compared to mobile phones. But that's not to deter people who only have a phone. You can still get a lot with a phone, particularly if you learn the fundamentals of photography. So if you're starting off with a phone, and that's exactly what I did, then all power to you. Keep going, keep learning, and you'll be able to get some really good photos if you do learn these concepts. But assuming that you are either getting into photography as a hobby, or you're looking to maybe one day turn pro and start making a living from it, you're going to want to buy some kind of interchangeable lens camera, sometimes referred to as DSLRs or SLRs. And the reason is you get more choices if you can change lenses. And also you get access to a lot more settings that you typically don't get access to with a phone. Within that world, that kind of subgenre of DSLR cameras, there are a few different versions, and there's a few different terms that you might want to learn about. So you have something called a point and shoot, which really is only a small step on from a mobile phone. It has a relatively small sensor, and it actually has a fixed lens that can zoom in and out, but you can't actually change that lens. So it gives you more versatility than a mobile phone, and it does allow you to start messing around with more settings. But the actual image quality is much greater than a mobile phone, and actually mobile phones have essentially kind of taken over this part of the market. So the next step up is kind of a crop sensor camera. And all that means is that it has a slightly smaller sensor than a full frame camera, which is just the term used for sensors that have a certain size. And then you get into the realms of kind of really expensive commercial photography type cameras that are called medium format cameras, which just have, again, an even bigger sensor. But basically they're all the same. So a crop or a full frame or a medium format, they're all just different sizes of sensor inside the camera, but the actual cameras all operate in almost exactly the same way. You have access to all the same types of settings and all the same sorts of functionality. To a point, every camera has its own sort of individual quirks and tech, and it depends whether you're buying a 20-year-old camera or a modern camera, but fundamentally they have the same kind of operation. So that's the difference between your sort of basic camera types. And if you're going to get into photography, I'd recommend the latter, the DSLR type, where you can change the lens and all the manual settings. By all means, start with a cheap basic camera. You don't need to go out and spend a lot of money on a camera to learn the fundamentals. I didn't. I actually borrowed my first camera, so thanks very much to my sister-in-law who lent me a camera that she just wasn't using, and she didn't want to have it just sat around not doing anything. It was actually this camera right here, and it's a basic level entry crop sensor Canon, and You can pick one of these up on eBay for a few £100 these days, and they will give you all the settings that you need to really learn and progress from an absolute beginner, and it'll be a while before you outgrow this camera. So, what do you need to know about cameras in general? So, the best piece of advice I can give you is, once you've actually got your camera, you've decided on the type of camera that you want, and you've gone out and you've bought it, go onto YouTube and search for that specific model and the word guide or user guide. And what it will do is it will take you through every element of your camera, from how you turn it on, how you put the screen out, how you navigate the menus and the settings and the memory cards and the batteries and all of that kind of stuff. And it will give you a complete guide. And I really learn a lot from these videos when I do it. Whenever I trade up to a new camera, I always look at one of these videos, because there are going to be settings that you weren't aware of beforehand, and it's a really, really useful thing to do. So definitely go out and do that. Stop this video, go out and do that, come back, and then you should be able to operate every function within the camera. So you should know how to turn it on, the camera modes, the aperture, the ISO, the shutter speed, the white balance, everything, and you'll know how to do it. The next best bit of advice is figure out how to do all of that stuff before you actually want to use your camera. So sit down at home watching TV and take photos of the people on the screen and just work out each little thing. And we're going to go through where you'd start with this in the next couple of videos. So don't worry if you don't know what settings you'd be using and what camera modes to use or anything like that, because we're going to go through that. But just take the time to practice and learn your camera, because the time to do it is before you actually want to go out and shoot something. So let's get cracking. One thing to note before we start is, when you start changing lenses on cameras, it opens up all sorts of possibilities, but there is one thing that you should know before you go out and buy a camera, and that's each mount system is different from camera brand to camera brand. So, and even within the same camera brand, there are different modes. So a crop sensor lens might not work particularly well on a medium format or a full frame camera. So before you go out and buy anything, always make sure that what you're buying is compatible with the system that you have, and if not, then it's not worth taking the risk. The easiest way to go and get advice on cameras, whether it's on what camera to buy, what lenses will work with your camera, what memory cards you need, anything like that, is either searching online or actually going and visiting your local camera store. They have an abundance of knowledge about all things cameras, and they're just waiting to help you. So by all means, go and do that, and that will really help you out. But what elements of a camera do they all share? And ultimately, any kind of DSLR camera is going to have a few common factors. They're going to have a mode dial and a power switch. I'll get into the modes in a second. You're going to be able to change lenses and take them off and then put other lenses back on. They'll all have a sensor inside. They'll have a slot where you can add the batteries or battery, depending on whether you're using a camera grip like this, which gives you multiple batteries, or just a single battery. They're going to have loads of switches on the back, which give you all of the options to change the settings. And they're going to have a shutter release button, which is just a fancy way of saying actually taking the photo. And they're going to have a menu button to access all the settings on the screen as well. Some will have a flip out screen like this that you can turn around. Others will just have a fixed back screen. They all perform the same job. This is just so that you can turn the camera around if you're ever going to take low photos or high photos, or you want to put it on a tripod and take photos of yourself. You can do all of that with one of these screens. So where do we actually get started with cameras? So assuming now that you've either got a camera or you're going to get one, or you just want to know about the fundamental settings, where do you start? And the point is, when you turn the camera on and you're faced with the first decision of what mode do you actually select to get started. And camera modes is a kind of the first point where people tend to get a bit lost and a bit confused, because they don't know how the camera works in the first place, let alone which mode to use. So we're going to group camera modes into two different types. You've got manual, which is where you decide everything. So every single decision about the camera, and there are loads. So you've got ISO, shutter speed, aperture, white balance, focus modes. You've got whether or not you're shooting in single shot or multi-shot or burst mode or high-speed burst mode with no autofocus, depending on which camera you've got, and all sorts of other things. But ultimately, you're going to want to learn all of these things eventually, and arguably the other modes, which are all some variation on the camera deciding all of those settings for you. So, and the easiest one being automatic mode. And if you just want to take a photo really quickly, then yeah, by all means, put it in automatic mode and take a photo. It will come out okay, assuming that you're not in pitch black conditions or some other really challenging scenario. But for a lot of people, just taking out a camera, putting it in automatic mode, and clicking the shutter is all you need to do. And that's pretty much what a phone is anyway. So if you're only going to need it for that, just use a phone. You get perfectly good quality out of a phone these days. You don't need to go down the route of a DSLR. But assuming you are going to go down that route and you do want to learn the fundamentals, then picking manual mode is where you want to start. And you want to learn the three fundamental settings, and they're the settings that you're going to change the most. And it's called the exposure triangle. And it's called the exposure triangle because each three of the settings, which is aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, can affect the brightness of the image. So each individual setting can make the image brighter and darker depending on which way you turn the setting, essentially. And you can balance them against each other depending on what the scenario dictates. And we're going to get into why you would pick certain things in certain scenarios in later videos that go into each one in specific and tell you all about what you need to know about that setting. But before you get into any of the other settings, you need to be able to get an image that's bright enough, or not too bright or not too dark. And that's the base plate. That's your fundamental grounding in photography, is can I take an image that is bright enough? That's up to you. There is no such thing as a proper exposure. It's whatever you think is bright enough. If you're going for a dark and moody image, then shoot it darker. Or if you want the image to be brighter, then by all means shoot it brighter. We're going to get into the limits of what you can and can't do with each one, and why you would then choose them in the next video. But that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the exposure triangle and those three settings first. Okay, so the exercise for this video is really easy. It's get your camera, no matter what it is, even if it's your phone, and get familiar with how to turn it on, putting a memory card in it, making sure you've got the right memory card, putting a battery in it, making sure it's got charge, turning it on, and putting it into manual mode. And if you can already do all of that, then you're ready for the next episode, and we can get cracking with Camera Basics Part 2, Aperture. Hope to join you there, and please do like and comment if you've got any questions or you just want to say hello. And please do click the subscribe button because it really does help, and I'll see you in the next one.